We're delighted to be speaking with Lyndi Allison. Here are a few words about Lyndi. Lyndi is living and writing adventurously. A writer of young adult, science fiction, and fantasy, Lyndi offers writing workshops and retreats in Panama via Tranquilo Retreat, which is a place where writers discover their unique voice, improve craft, and write creatively. I can see it's where you are right now, Lyndi. I know we've just talked about it, and I was looking at some of the pictures of like the facilities and of the rooms of this place on your website just a moment ago. It looks and sounds absolutely gorgeous. I'd love to know how this happened. How did you end up running writing retreats in like this gorgeous part of the world?
Well, it's a combination of things. I have a husband who really dislikes the cold. So since he was about 25 years old, he asked if we could retire somewhere where it's hot. And Panama definitely qualifies as hot, particularly for people like me who are an all-season person. And I also was a teacher, a high school teacher, and a teacher of adults as well, teaching high school to adults. And what I was doing at that time was I would take one morning a month and I would write in a coffee shop with my friends and just keep that appointment because it was very busy. I was teaching, volunteering, probably overworking myself. And I took the best aspects of teaching and decided that I would reframe myself, using some of the best aspects of teaching. So in the classroom, I preferred teaching creative writing. I found that in sharing our stories and listening well to each other's stories and developing our voices, we were able to, have more compassion for one another and understand where other people were coming for better. And it made for a really nice classroom environment. And so I took what I loved, creative writing, and I took what I didn't like, which was marking essays on Sunday afternoons. So I dropped that part of it. I don't have to mark anymore, so it's wonderful. And I use a method of teaching writing in the workshop that fits really well with my values. So about discovering unique voice, about holding space for people, about explaining to people what's working in their writing. And as we do that for one another, we all learn from one another because other people have other strengths and we identify those in their work. And there was one more draw to Panama, and that is I have two adult children who live here. So I thought I might get to see my grandkids if I ever had any, but I'm still waiting on that.
Well, you're in the right place, it sounds like, should that happen. I remember you mentioned your son's also a creative person. We're all creative people, but he's working in the creative space, right?
Yes, very much. And he's been a real inspiration in my life. He has kind of two aspects to his business. He's a freelance photographer. And so he does lifestyle photography. And he's really worked on developing his skills and his sphere of influence. He also has an aspect of his business called Lens Venture, where he takes people out on outdoor adventures and teaches photography, and that's called Lens Venture. And then he gets to live on a cabin on a surfer beach, so that part's not too bad either.
Sounds awesome. I was curious to ask, you kind of touched upon this, I guess this method that you use of finding writers finding their voice and you holding that space. I think you mentioned kind of right at the start of your after I'd kind of finished up your introduction and you were introducing what you're up to, this monthly coffee shop writing with your friends. Was there anything in that experience that kind of helped you feel, this is interesting and maybe informed kind of what you're doing now at Tranquilo, or am I putting two and two together and getting 16?
No, certainly we draw from all of our past experience. And in that case, it was a keeping of an appointment. You know, if you're very busy, you tend to schedule your writing, which is what I was doing. And there was probably always a reason, other work that I could have been doing during that writing time, but I've made a commitment to other people to write with them. And so I kept that appointment. And the coffee wasn't bad either. And also, there's something about writing together. There is like a creative energy, you know, when we're all invested in our creative writing. There, you know, I don't know if I want to use the word magical and mysterious, but there's something that happens in that environment that helps you to, you know, access your best writing. And so definitely I drew on that for the workshops.
Well, I feel like Lauren will have something to say here.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I did the same thing. That was my first writing groups. We met in a coffee shop once a week, and it was pretty casual, but it was also a standing appointment. And I experienced the same thing. There is something just different about writing in a group, and it is kind of magical. And I find that, you know, so many writers, when they sit and they say, I'm blocked, I can't do it. It's not a lack of skill or talent or education or even experience. It's fear. And that group energy seems to really help with the fear. Have you found that with your retreats? Do writers show up very afraid and you're able to move through those blocks during the retreat?
Yeah, I think there are several ways it comes about. Sometimes we're just jumbled all up with whatever we're processing. There's been a few things going on in the world, and we always, you know, if we are out there, we've got stuff that's going on in our lives. So sometimes they just need to write to get that out of the way, to access the story that's in behind it. You know, but there's some really good teaching on about going fearward. Wherever you're afraid to write, that's where you need to go. And if you can do that in an environment where you can be honest in your writing and know that the people around you will accept you for anything that you write, you know, that helps you to develop this community where it's safe to do so. And, you know, you address something really important. Fear is something a lot of us bring. You know, we've had trauma or just the unknown, or, you know, all the things that we bring, fear of rejection, all of those things can fall away when you write together and share what you're writing. So it's very powerful.
Do you think it's harder for introverts to share? I felt like in my groups, I had a lot of introverts. And so it took them a little while to get warmed up. I'm an introvert too. But once we formed bonds with each other and we're like, oh, it's safe, introverts can be quite talkative and really open. Do you experience that in your groups?
Most definitely. And the groups that I hold are very small. So I usually only meet with about a half a dozen people. And yeah, we tend to hold back, and usually the extroverts kind of carry all the conversations, so that, you know, we have that space where we can hold back and just kind of watch what's going along. But you know, introverts, when they, you know, begin to write and they begin to share, and they discover that people are finding something very valuable in their work, and they're affirmed and they're allowed to be their authentic selves. You know, they don't have to put on an extroverted face and pretend to be extroverted for a while. They can be exactly who they are. And they develop a sense of comfort with the people who they write with.
Mm. And what do people tend to write? Is it kind of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, all of the above? How does it tend to work in terms of, because I'd imagine some people perhaps know where to start, but others are like, well, you know, I just don't know, like, what do I write? And, you know, where do I write, perhaps pen and paper, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, well, we start with prompts that are very open-ended. And what's amazing is we all write to the same prompt and we all go somewhere different with our writing. You know, what's been a little bit different about the writing workshops here in Panama is I've had the benefit of having some songwriters who have been a part of the group. And, they're able to go deep very quickly and write very succinctly, and they bring a lot to the group. But we have memoirists in the group, those that are writing flash fiction. Myself, I'm writing novellas. We have someone writing a novel. And you don't have to write to the prompt. You can just pick up where you were before and continue writing, or if there's a burning scene that you need to do, you can write to that. But for those that come with, not sure what they're going to write, I've gone to many of these workshops where I'm thinking, you know what, I'm just feeling like completely dry. I'm feeling like I'm going to get to the page and there's not going to be anything that goes onto the page. But one of the things that really helps with this method is it's about, you keep writing. And you give yourself permission to, have a not good writing day or a good writing day. Because sometimes, first drafts produce something pretty special. But you can even start by saying, I don't know what to write. Or, or you'll begin writing and you're not sure what the next line going to say. But if you keep writing, I coach people to just write, okay, I don't know what comes next. And often by the time you've written that much, it's ready to be written. The next part is there. And we don't stop and think. We don't, okay, this topic's about this, and what do I think about this topic? And, I think I studied on this topic, and what did that person say? We don't do that at all. We just write the prompt, and depending on the time frame, sometimes 10, 15, 20, or 25 minutes that we write for.
I love that you said we don't stop to think. I find that so much with writers, the more you think, and I'm not saying you shouldn't think at all, but the more you think, you get caught up with the inner critic.
Yes, absolutely. Right. We switch into the left brain and out of the right brain. And sometimes I don't even know what I think or even what I've written until I read it. And I'll be surprised. I'll be like, oh, I didn't realize I really thought that about that, or that my character thought that about that particular thing. Or I've been stuck on what they think about something, or they can't solve something. Or in the case of my trilogy, I came to a place where, okay, I've got these 3 foes and I don't know how they're going to resolve this in this culminating scene. But in pushing through, in writing in the workshops, it came onto the page.
There have been times when, kind of similar to what you were talking about just starting wherever, like I've written, I don't know, remember my early days of journaling, I don't know what I'm going to write about today, or I might just write about like what's happened in my day or just what's on my mind. And then in that, something will come out where I'll be like, oh, like I didn't even know that I'd made that connection, or I was holding on to that story and I've now just let it out, and it's kind of given me some clarity or some sense of release, or it continues to surprise me. And it's like, I don't know where it comes from, but it seems like there's just this well which actually has like, I know oftentimes I used to think that, oh, I have to wait for a certain time or this and that, and just these perfect like magical nuggets to appear. But I'm like, there's this well in me. It's not all going to be like really beautiful, succinct, gorgeous stuff, but to kind of it's helped that I realized it, but also to imagine that there's like this unlimited well inside of me has kind of helped me change my perception of, oh, like I've got nothing to write about, so to speak.
Well, that's an excellent picture for sure. The well that never runs dry. I love that. And, you're addressing something that's very common in the workshops where people are going, I don't know where that came from. I've never even thought about writing a story, or at least I didn't know I had, and suddenly it's on the page. And like you said, it might not be perfect. It's raw writing, but there is something in the writing that's already begun, and that you build upon and then you later craft. It's usually easier to, craft from something that's on the page than looking at a blank page and trying to craft from the very beginning.
I just want to jump in and ask before we get too far away from it. You mentioned sometimes you notice your characters, like you didn't know what was going to happen and you couldn't figure out how to resolve that scene. And then you sat down and it just sort of came out. I find that so often with people when they're thinking too hard about what the characters should do, or they have their own agenda for the characters. It's like the characters don't like it. And the characters will shut down and sort of be like, I don't want to go in that direction. Stop pushing me. I'm not going to do anything now. Do you run into that with your own characters or the people in your workshop? Like the more you let go, the characters will kind of come to life on their own and do their own thing?
Yeah, and often when people, say that they're experiencing writer's block, it's for that very reason, Lauren, that you've identified. They may have either gone off on a tangent like way too far and they need to backtrack a little bit, or they're in their own mind thinking, I'm going from here and I need to get my characters to there, and it's like dragging a kid having a tantrum, kicking and screaming through to the end, and it's not working. And so, then you sit down and you have a talk with the character, and, there's no longer any need for this tantrum. You're cooperating with the character who's taking you on the journey that they need to go. And often to show and reveal some new truth to yourself or to your readers or to themselves.
I find that a lot, where it turns out the writer is actually uncomfortable with the direction the character wants to go in. And they say, that's too much like me, or I'm worried what people will think when they read it. So they're bringing these, I'm really worried about what other people will think. And then the character's like, well, I don't care at all. This is what happens. This is what I did. And I say, if you can just let go, it will really start to flow almost effortlessly. You'll be shocked at how much material will pour out of you. But it can be scary too. Like, do you find that writers have that anxiety about losing control of the story?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes we do lose control. And I think if we just say, what, that's okay. That's part of my writing process, as long as, I take the time to figure out where I am and where the character's telling me I need to go, then, it's fine. Like it's okay to put something on the page that isn't going to make it into the story. Or sometimes that doesn't make it into the story, but there's one tiny aspect that's in there that does. So you need to write that, so give yourself permission. Go ahead and write what needs to be written. And then, the founder of the method I use, Pat Schneider, she talks in her book, Writing Alone and with Others. And she talks about mining, when sometimes we're in the mine and we're digging around and, we discover the copper, but maybe we need to poke around there a little more and dig a little deeper and find the silver, and then keep digging till we get that gold. So, if we're broaching a certain subject and we're kind of scratching at the surface and there's something there, then, mine a little deeper and, see what you can learn or just what your character can learn, because we want our characters to have some kind of development. So
you probably just saw my face when you said Pat Schneider. I love her. I adore her. Her book, How the Light Gets In, I recommend it to all my students in all my classes. Can you talk a little bit more about her method that you use? Because she's really amazing. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. So, it's called the Amherst Writers and Artists Method. And, she said that if she'd known how it would go worldwide, she would probably have called it something else instead of her little community area there. But in the book that you mentioned, she talks about, that's a book about, writing as a spiritual practice, which she ultimately defines as all writing as having that spiritual practice. But in terms of the method itself, there are some affirmations and practices that we uphold. And, often, I can say this because I'm a teacher, I can get away with this, we're committed to marking certain things, and we have to check certain things. And sometimes, people's process maybe is, they're so worried about making mistakes, we create that thinking. And so in this case, when we write, we treat all the writing as raw. And so we never critique at this point in time. We only say, I felt like I was right in the scene at that time because I could smell what the character's smelling. I could hear what they were hearing. I could, when they were having those visceral reactions, I was tensing up. I could feel their tension. And so we identify what's working in the piece. We treat everything as fiction. So even if we know someone's writing a memoir, or if someone's writing fiction and we know that person well enough to know that some aspect of that is true, we treat everything as fiction. We never identify the writer as the person in the story. We never say you, when you kick that kid or something, we never say that. We just say, when the character in that story, or when the writer says this, I experienced an emotive experience. And so the language that we use, creates a little bit of distance so that people can write about anything. And we believe everyone has their own unique voice. We don't talk about the writing outside the workshop unless the writer themselves were to bring it up and ask you something about it. And we value everyone's writing equally. The facilitator writes with the people who are participating. We don't base the writing on whether it's good based on someone's education or socioeconomic status or gender or, every person is treated equally, and we find something good in everyone's writing, and everyone has a beginning place, and everyone grows their writing from one another. And so those are a few of the practices and affirmations. That there are a few more, but what she has established is just, a superb place that you can take anywhere. Like sometimes we write here in my bohio, and sometimes we hike out to a waterfall, plop ourselves there, or, go in the mountain or by the beach. We take that same premise there, and it just works everywhere because, she gave us such great guidelines for establishing and helping people write their best.
I'm curious about that distance that you mentioned. It got me thinking, because I was thinking, one of the things I find fascinating is memoir, and the power of memoir. I guess in its kind of traditional writing as I sense. On the other hand, I've written fiction in the past, and inevitably I notice parts of myself come up in the characters that I write about, and sometimes I'm like, I've not noticed anything, but I'm sure there are parts there. So part of me does wonder if everything we write kind of comes from ourself. But that distance is interesting, and perhaps ties into one of the many ways that writing is so powerful and can kind of heal and transform. And I kind of like the idea of not critiquing, but more just encouraging the process of unfurling in a safe way, as opposed to kind of closing up and perhaps blocking off something which blocking off perhaps an opportunity for expression and for healing, and to let what comes out need to come out.
And to let it remain their story, not to change their story. Right. I think, we don't want to impose anything. I mean, obviously, if someone says, I'm stumped, I'm lacking ideas, you might talk it out loud, just like a brainstorming session sometimes. But, we don't want to, suggest how maybe say their ending should go. It needs to be their story the way it needs to be told, because they're the only one that can tell their story. And, the critiquing comes later, after we critique, after we craft, then we may need to look at it with a more critical eye, but you've already established such things as trust and ways of saying things, you know, just identifying, well, that was unclear there to me, which is really important because, you know, we have so much in our heads and we think it's on the page and it might not be there. So people can identify, you know, what's unclear. That, you know, it is important to get to the critiquing stage, but it's just not at the initial, you know, the drafting and the discovering of the story stage where that happens. Because like Lauren addressed earlier, that switches you back to that left brain critical thinking, that editor who's fixing everything as you go along and stopping the flow of the story coming.
That's what, sorry, go ahead, Jazz.
I was going to ask about, well, I was going to ask next about Lyndi's books, because she's got a trilogy, but did you, if you've got a question in relation to what we've been talking about before we move on?
I think that's one of the big mistakes I see with writers is in the raw stage, they're critiquing entirely too early. Like they've written 3 pages ever, you know, and they don't know, they're like, maybe this is the beginning of a memoir. Maybe I'm just figuring stuff out. And then they take it to a critique group and they're totally shut down because the critique group is like doing work with this very raw material that's so far down the road really for them. And it shuts them out. Like you said, Jazz, like it closes up the process. And I think that's something writers miss is you want to open in those beginning stages and not, you don't want to close anything down.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, you know, talking about the critique and something Lyndi said about you want it to be their story. In my head, like publishing came up. And sometimes in traditional publishing, that's what can happen in that process. You asked you're asked to directly or indirectly change your story. Have you self-published your books, Lyndi?
Yes, I made a decision to do that. I did carefully consider both methods. I did also pitch my story. And I received some fairly favorable response to it. But when I started to get to this stage where I was being given conflicting feedback on it, I started to realize there's, don't get me wrong, there's some very skilled people in publishing who can make suggestions that add to a story. But, you know, I was getting the exact opposite feedback. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, this is now subjective. This person likes there to be way more description, and this person wants me to take it out because there's too much. And I started to realize that, you know, you as the author at this point, after you've been critiqued or received feedback, you really do need to think about the writing. You need to think about, you know, what you as an author are going to decide about how the story is either going to go or how you're going to enrich, or if you're good with the story. And, you know, I heard a few things like, oh, it's got promise in it. It's got promise. It's almost there. And you know, editors, I'm very fortunate. I have this wonderful editor who appreciates my writing and who, you know, helps me to put my best story forward without imposing on it to make it her story. And so I did look at traditional publishing. I think I probably could have pursued that and gone further with it, but I'm a business person. You know, I have a quiet writing retreat. We rent out our casita to writers. You know, there's the workshops, and I'd heard authors, you know, lose control of their work, not just of their writing, sometimes their book covers, you know, sometimes being asked to, you know, promote in certain ways, like if you're an introvert, you know, there are things that more organic ways you might be able to promote. And so I made a decision that I was going to have good critiquers, good beta readers, good editor. And so that was my best writing. And I drafted the concept for my own covers, and I researched, who would, again, embrace my idea for the covers. And, in looking at it as a business, I learned so much. I just learned, it was a great growing experience for me. I'm not so thrilled about this part of the growing experience, which is the marketing, because that introverted side of us comes out, and I'm just learning that too. And I'm enjoying it, but I'm not always doing it. I still have to step out in some of the things that I know I need to do. But yeah, that was the decision I made to keep creative control over my book, and to put my own stamp on it, I guess.
Yeah, for me, that creative control, that the freedom is huge for me. And then you mentioned the learning part of the journey as well, and I love to learn. So, and Lauren and I have talked about this as well. I feel that I like to think of, writing has got inherent value in and of itself. And there's different parts to that, but in a similar way, self-publishing and everything that comes with it, all those pieces, and yes, it's a lot to do when you've got to do all the parts, including the marketing. I think the experience in and of itself, in terms of growth, you said growthful, is very rewarding.
Yes, and I think it's important to remember, even in traditional publishing, I mean, unless you're with the big four, right? You are going to be doing the marketing anyways. Small publishing houses and even medium houses, they do not have the ability or the funds to be promoting. I mean, I know a writer with a small press who recently was asked to contribute money towards the promotion of her own book through the company. You are going to be, promoting yourself anyways. So you can't, have this expectation that part's going to be done for you.
Yeah, I did a couple of weeks as an intern with one of the big publishing houses, and it was interesting. And, there's some very interesting, smart people, but even some of like the bigger names, I was like, wow, this is how many books I've got to work with. This is how much time and attention this book gets. It was quite eye-opening. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. And, they do bring a great level of expertise and, a production plan that they have in place that's been tried and effective for them. And so, if that's the route that people would like to go, well, that kudos to them, because they'll have that team behind them.
Well, and another thing, you said the marketing part's hard for you because you're an introvert. And I find that so often with introvert writers, where number one, we don't want to feel exposed. And number two, we don't want to feel pushy, or like we live in fear that we will ever be a nuisance to anybody. So we're like, I put one tweet out on Twitter this month about my book. That's it. I don't want to bother anyone. And it's like, well, you got to put out maybe 3 a day, and my clients are like, 3 a day. How did you deal with being an introvert and being seen in that way? Was it easier because you'd already been teaching, so you felt like you had been, speaking in front of groups and being seen, or is it still hard to work with that marketing piece?
It's definitely still a struggle for me. I released a book this past month, and so I sent out my, kind of first real official email on that. And immediately I had I forget, something like 8 people unsubscribe, right? And I was just like, oh my, I try to make that have value for people, but it's sometimes about finding the right people. And then, I sent out an email on launch day. Well, then I was doing a free promotion on book 1, so people would get book 1, and then hopefully I'd have some read through of all 3 books. So I had to let people know I was doing a free promotion. And then I switched to, like pre-Christmas, the first book's 99 cents and, to get people started and have it as a Christmas gift. And then I had to let people know about that. And now, like, I just backed way away from it. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like, I don't think I'll ever need to send another email or promo again, which is of course absurd, right? And I see other authors who I've been in community with who are sending me, they have like Instagram is 5 a day, and I if I'm like 2 a week, I'm putting myself out there, right? So, and it's a different experience than teaching was. Admittedly, I got nervous as a teacher too. Every time I got a new class, it took me, probably the first week to settle in. And once I got to know my students, they got to know me, I was fine. So, it's not unexpected for me if I'm, asked to share something, and I'm nervous before, but like you said, we all have that fear. Sometimes we just have to do things that we're not always comfortable with. We maybe just don't have to do it as much as the extroverts.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the unsubscribes, because that's one of the number one blocks I get with my clients. They're like, I sent something and 2 people unsubscribed. I'm doing something wrong. And I always say, you're not trying to keep everyone. And you're not trying to please everyone, which I think a lot of us feeling introverts, we are people pleasers. So we feel like, oh, I've done something wrong. But I say you're matching. You are matching your energy with people. And when people unsubscribe, they're just saying, oh, we're not a match. It's not personal. It's like if you were online dating, you're just not a match. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. You will be a match for other people. So there's that filter, but it's hard. And I always tell people too, I'm like, don't check your unsubscribe rates. Like, just don't even look. You don't need to know that information. That's
and turn off the alerts. Don't get the emails that say so-and-so just unsubscribed.
Yeah, in that case, I don't really know who it was, and I didn't want to, and I didn't pursue that. But on the flip side, I am a person who unsubscribes. I think I accidentally unsubscribed to Lauren's, because in one of mine, when I was going through and unsubscribing, I went, oh my goodness. But, because we sign up for something of value that people give us, and that's the point, that you sign up. But then when I start getting, so many emails in a week, I just don't have time. And it's not even anything against the person at all. It's not even personal. It's just, it would just take away from, what it is that we're doing. And I had a good lesson prior to the actual email going out when I started at a test run on mine. And someone contacted me and they said, oh, I don't want you to use that email. I want you to use this email because the email you used was my business one. I want you to use the one where I send all those messages I don't read. And I was like, oh. But I mean, it makes so much sense. Like, if you subscribe to something and your inbox is getting filled with, like promotion and even things that are of value, and some things you do want to go through and read. But if it's clogging up and blocking, the actual business that you need, you may need to separate that out. So, I mean, it's just a good lesson for me not to take myself too seriously. I'm on the other side of that as well. And it's, something you're greatly encouraged to do. And it is a good way to apprise people of what you're doing that's new. I mean, in those emails, I'm still offering some free services as well and value. So, I'm comfortable with that. And it's a very soft sell, in terms of my actual writing. People are either interested and would like to try the book, or they're not. And it's just personal taste. So
that's why I always say people are interested or they're not. It doesn't have much to do with you.
Exactly.
I'm curious to ask for your, speaking of, I guess, marketing, and for your retreats, how you've kind of gone about your marketing, relationship building. Because I believe actually how we connected, I think 2 people I connected with both mentioned you. Elizabeth Minor and Shelley Francis, I think.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and I was like, oh gosh, it's an awfully small world where two people like, and you're in Pat, like, so yeah, no, I'm curious to know like what, like how, what, because again, I'm conscious that there's different marketing books potentially online is quite different to how you might be doing your in-person retreat marketing, or maybe it isn't. So yeah, no, I'd love to hear more about that if you're willing to share.
Yes, it was again something that we had to test out and that we learned. I began simply by uploading our facilities on Airbnb, but wrote that we cater to writers. And that drew a number of writers and also other creative people. Or often it drew people who didn't know they wanted to write, but found out they did once they'd gotten here and had some experience of that. But everything changed. We were really starting to soar with new writers coming. We set up the writing retreat so that it's set up for the person. So some people want to come and they want to go in the casita and hole away, and they don't want anyone interrupting them, and they don't want anyone bothering them. And in 2 weeks, they'll come out as they roll their suitcase by, to go where they need to go. And that's great. But other people, they come and they jump in on the writing workshops. I also started a writing community here where we have a teaching workshop once a month on some aspect of writing, editing, publishing, or marketing. They jump in there. We write together. We talk about their works in progress. We exchange writing. We cater it to whoever the person is. So we were just really about to soar, and then things changed in the world. And then following the opening up of things again, when people could have bookings here again, the whole market had shifted. It was about people who'd been in Panama City in their apartment buildings for 8 months who hadn't come out. And they're going, can we just use your barbecue and pool? Like they just needed out of these boxes, right? And so for a while, we realized that was just a need of the community and the people around us. So we did that for a little while, and then we just pulled it off of Airbnb. And now, again, it's been an organic process. There is a gentleman who has a podcast in Canada. He has a Facebook group called Canadian Creative Writers, Randy Lacey, and he invited me to a podcast. Well, when he heard about us, he said, please post, about your retreat to the whole group there. And so, we're starting to get invitations that are more specifically directed to writers and referrals. That's the other thing that has really been helpful. Either people in this community who are here and know what we're doing. You mentioned Elizabeth Minor, who we know. She actually used to live here in Panama, and she's a great connector of people.
Oh yeah.
She brings people together. The first time, I moved here without my husband for a while till he retired. And so I was going out by myself, and she would draw me into groups, and she would promote me. She would say, here's what Linda is here to do. You've got to try one of her introductory workshops. And so a lot of word of mouth and a lot of connecting with people through writers groups online. I mean, we don't have someone here every day. We only, if we have 20 writers come in a year. I mean, we've had people stay with us from 20 different countries. So, part of it is, the richness of the stories that they bring and what we learned from, people from all around the world. It's just been a fabulous learning experience. And I'm a real kind of beach walker, mountain hiker. So, I take them along with me, and we find these, nice spaces. And so I think they're like writing by a waterfall. Like, it's refreshing to sit by a waterfall, but writing by a waterfall I had a gentleman from Ireland go, oh my, he came back and he wrote a poem and he wasn't expecting to, he wasn't planning to come to write. He was a writer, so he just kind of wanted to be here and talk stuff, but he wasn't expecting to write. And so there's something about the natural spaces. Sometimes it's the weather that drives people. They just want to, like my husband, they want to go somewhere hot. And yeah, so it's not like we need to draw thousands of people here. And it's just we're providing a quiet space if we plan it well. There's the odd time when we can't plan it, like during carnival or holidays, because we have the culture around us, and there's very loud music and fireworks and things like that. But generally speaking, we live on a street. We're an hour and a half out of Panama City. So this is sort of like cottage country for Panama City. So on my street, other than myself, most of the year, my husband and I are the only people who live on our street, other than some caretakers who are here caring for their homes. So, it's very, very quiet. And then on these special occasions or the odd weekend, things lighten up.
Well, and as you're talking about, I'm like, this is an introvert's paradise. Like the wheels in my head are turning. Like, can I go there in 2022 or 2023? And I imagine it must help too, to leave your old life and all the old surroundings and come somewhere new for the writing. Like it's a shakeup in your routine, and it's a shakeup in what you're physically looking at. Do you feel like that helps people to, start their memoir, start their book, take the plunge, write that poem by the waterfall because they're not at home? Does that help, do you think?
Yes. And I think is it Julia Cameron that wrote The Artist's Way? She talks a lot about how, you take yourself on writing dates where you go to new places. She highly recommends that. And that's certainly the case for, when we're at home and we're planning to take, a day to write, we're throwing in the laundry and we're, pulling out of the freezer what we need, and we're tending to things in the home. But, people who are out of their space and coming to a new space that's, something new to see, it's very natural. Like it's outdoors. We live outdoors. I had no idea I was such an outdoor person, but I step outside my bedroom door onto my back porch, and I live outside all day long. My Bahia is my living room. And so, being outside and having your feet in the grass, your bare feet in the grass, and, the stars being so bright, you're just, laying in the grass or laying in the pool, looking at the stars. All these things are filling our soul and bringing us inspiration and are helping us to consider things in a new way. And so, the writing is very fresh and surprising. And that's a really delightful place to be in.
I love that.
For me, there's something about, I've been trying to incorporate it into my regular life now that I'm back here in London, because Lyndi, when we first connected, or actually tried to connect, my internet wasn't playing ball. I was in Madeira, and that trip was really great for me in lots of different ways. 2 months away, I got a lot of clarity about certain things. I made a lot of progress, had a lot of fun. I actually ended up, I feel it might have happened anyway, but I had the realization to pivot my business whilst I was out there, which was pretty major. But for me, there's something about like when you're in like a different environment out, and it's kind of outdoorsy, natural. I try and do a walking commute every day now. Just stuff gets shaken up. Like you mentioned the inspiration, stuff gets shaken up. I feel like there's things which happen to the body, which I think move around and create kind of inspiration. I don't know. It's hard to put into words.
Yes, and I think something culturally too. Like I'm North American, and even when I was teaching, after having traveled places, I would share with my students that you really don't understand how North American you are until you get outside North And, Panama has a culturally different way of life. Things move slowly here. And, there's a whole slowing down that kind of happens, and, a letting go of things that, separates you from, what in my case was, fairly, too busy life. And you can feel yourself gear down, and then you become more open to new things. And, you might experience some new aspects of the culture. uh, you know, uh, Panama, like if you were to go out to dinner, you might sit there for hours. If you didn't ask for the bill, you would never get it, right? Like you have to know that, you have to let them know that you're going to be leaving soon, and maybe let them know ahead of time, because it's going to take a while, to get your bill. And during that time, you've got all these spaces that you're encountering new things and you're observing. And there's some aspects of the culture here that are so beautiful, that uphold, my values in terms of, getting together as a community, and again, in North America, it was very isolating in many cases. We as a family intentionally brought those groups together, but here it's happening all over the place every day, and you can plug in, if you've had a intense writing session for a while and you just want to leave your writing space and go out, you can find a community to be a part of. And so, or not, you can stay where it's just lovely and quiet and rest. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The change gives us a fresh outlook, and brings something fresh to the writing as well.
Well, and I love that you said slowing down, because I think with the pandemic and the lockdown, so many introverts realized, oh, my natural pace is much slower than what I've been pushing myself to do. I think people were just so scattered and in this routine of, even if I'm introverted, I do 6 different things a day, and I go to the office and I pick up the kids, and then we have dinner, and then we go out. And it's too much for introverts. I think most introverts need simple routines, not a lot of big activities, or maybe one big activity during the day, and that's it. And it sounds like writers can come, like you said, when you slow down, it makes space and it opens up for the ideas to come in, for the characters to come in, for that inspiration. I mean, I'm pretty much sold on these retreats. I'm thinking I'm going to come pretty soon. This sounds
We'd
lovely.
love to have that. We'd love to have that.
I love the slowing down.
Yeah, I had the ideas for these 3 novellas for years, and I wrote this bit and that bit, and but it wasn't really till I came here that I wrote all 3, and in these last 9 months, I published all 3. So, that's just an example of how much space was created in order to do what my soul was craving to do, right? I had, in my writing, my characters experience a lot of grief, and that's in my work. I saw that a lot, that, young people often didn't have ways for processing their grief. And so, it was important for me to write this story, because I felt that the characters are learning to do that in the stories. But that was nagging at me for a long time. And I was continually seeing the need, but not, bringing any solution to that. So it's been very gratifying to slow down and consider and enrich the writing and have some continuity to the writing. With those coffees once a month, they were fabulous. They kept me writing. They got me going writing. But when you're writing that once a month, you're reading what you wrote last month for part of the time to re-engage with the material, and you're forgetting, which direction did I go? And there's a lack of continuity, and you're continually, having to refresh what you'd written. And with the continuity, it really, I feel like it enriched the writing. So the space and quiet space for me is important.
What does your writing practice look like now with that in mind, Lyndi? Is it daily, weekly, a few times a week?
I I write formally in groups 3 times a week, and then I write on my own. Sometimes I have to have a conversation with my brain to tell my brain that, I don't need to write at 3 in the morning. I can write at 3 p.m. I'd be happy to do that. But, for me, it's about starting a ritual of practice, like with my whole life, not just with the writing. So what it looks like to me, if I wake up before sunrise, I'll write for a little bit. Then I'll go for a walk and try and catch the sunrise. I'll maybe hit the beach, and then I'll put on the coffee pot, stretch in the pool, and then I'll sit down at my computer. And I typically write or some aspect of business sometimes until, almost lunchtime. Then I'm a power snoozer. And then I wake up and it's like, oh, I just woke up in the morning, and I can go for a little while again. After 3 o'clock in the afternoon or at night, I'm an early morning person. Like, I'm no good. So it's more about structuring my life to set myself up well. And I realize when I'm saying that, I'm speaking from like a place of privilege. I'm formally retired from my other job. So I recognize that. But, I certainly invite people for a week or 2 or a month to come along and experience that practice. Or if they're a late person, they can switch the day around. But it's, I write different things as well. So it's not always about the novellas. I've written like flash fiction and personal essays and adult short stories. And I've been putting together an anthology there. So, sometimes I'm mixing it up a little bit.
Do you always, you mentioned a few different things, anthologies and flash fiction and novellas. Do you always, when you're writing, have something that becomes a project, or do you have any just because writing or journaling or anything of that kind?
Definitely. Sometimes I will take a prompt. Sometimes I will just write. I'm a big person about gratitude, and I'm a big person about gratitude at all stages, like if you're in a bad place or if you're in a good place, so taking time to express that is very important. I'm also, I could be an angsty person, right? So, and lately, there's been lots you can be angsty about. So, writing about that really diffuses that angst for me. I've even struggled with the whole idea of wearing a mask, not for health reason, but the whole idea of, your mouth being covered and that's, where your voice, and that's all a part of it, right? That feels symbolically like a restriction of that to me. So, these kinds of things come up regularly. And so I make sure to write about that so that, I feel like I still have that freedom of expression, and I don't have to share that everywhere. Sometimes there's something that's helpful, but sometimes it's just something deeply personal. And I always say that writing isn't therapy, but it sure is therapeutic. So it can really help you see things in a new way.
I always say that no matter what you're writing, even if it's, the second part of your trilogy and you intend to publish it, in the raw stage, just assume no one's going to read it. It's you and the page, and that's it. And it's private and it's personal and it's intimate. And I think that's when you're going to do your best writing, because you won't censor, it being private, I think, is important at first.
Yes. And, It is. It's just like deeply personal, and it's interesting later sometimes when that gets shared, that most deeply personal part, is far more universal than you understood, right? And there's someone who, when they read that, when you have written that in honesty and in freedom, that people, they feel that on the page and it resonates with them. And then you've got connection, right? If we don't give ourselves permission to go to those really hard places, then I think, we're stealing from ourselves and from others. And so it's really, really important to share that and share those moments.
Yeah, I think I'm much more about, by using our authentic voices, whoever you are, wherever you are, like whatever stage of life, whatever you've got going on, you have if you let your authentic voice come through, it will connect with other people, as opposed to, I have to, be a really good writer, or, be like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, or, whoever it might be. That has, again, used to, I think, trip me up. And I was like, oh, I need to get to a certain far away, immeasurable place of like ability, as opposed to just like Lauren said, let it come out. I it's one of the reasons I still kind of write everything by hand before I type it up, because it's a lot easier for me to, the pen to paper is a unique experience for me, but I can kind of trick myself a lot more easily than I would if I was typing on a screen. If I'm typing on a screen, I'm like, oh, this is going to be shared. This is going to be shared. This on my computer screen. It's just one click away from publish. Whereas in my journal, or in like a notebook, those are just my private thoughts until I then say, okay, I'm going to publish this. So I almost trick myself into just letting myself kind of just be with it and not think too much about the release and where it's going to go, so to speak.
Yes, I mean, technology is great. I mean, we're using technology today, but I find when I move from the paper to the screen, I have a tendency towards correcting some of the mistakes as I'm going along, because I can see them, and it's really easy to go back and do that. And then you're going forward and back and forward and back. Whereas on the page, I know no one's going to look in my journal, and I can write. And then when I go back, it's obvious what some of those mistakes are. And then when I type it in, I can change them at that point. So it's, I'll find run-on sentences or the wrong use of the word no. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty obvious. And, but amongst all of that, I find something that's far deeper, far richer, far more meaningful. And, it's probably going to sound really silly, but when I finished the trilogy, when I got to the end of it, like I cried.
That does not sound silly at all. I have been there. I have been there.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell how the ending goes, but I was like, wow, it brought tears to my eyes. And then, but again, process while all this is going on. I had a little bit of trouble writing the third book because I had this second trilogy coming into my brain while I was working, and it kept interfering. And there were a few times I had to stop and just write all that down really, really fast and then get back to it to clear my head. But it was, the work was so meaningful to me, and the characters were so important, and what they were going through and how they were growing were so important to me that I moved myself.
Well, I think there's something about, where you mentioned just by chance there was a theme of grief in the books themselves. I think when you come to the end of a project, especially, it's a trilogy, 3 parts, I'm sure weeks, months, maybe years you were working on this. It's probably a sense of an ending and a grieving on your part too, with the story.
Yes, you're definitely highly invested in it, and these characters are the people who you have spent time with and got to know on a very, very deep level. So
Mm. I'm conscious of the time. Lauren, was there anything that you wanted to ask Lyndi before
I
we
want
make
to
sure
ask,
that
I want to
folks
ask
won't know where to go?
everything, but the one question I'll ask is, what is the name of your trilogy? Where can people find it? Is it on Amazon? Is it on your website? And what are the details on that?
Yes, the trilogy is called the Summer Triangle Trilogy, which is an asterism. It's a science fiction that happens out in space. And the first book is The Lines Between Our Stars. The second book is The Bridges Between Us. And the third book is The Clashing of Our Worlds. And it can be found on Amazon, both ebook and Kindle Unlimited, as well as paperback. If you go to tranquiloretreat.com, that has my blog with information from Q&As of writers and their experiences. If there's something people encounter, they might find answers there. My books are listed there, information about the workshops, and I'm starting a resource page there as well. So.
That's great. And anyone listening, if you go in 2022 or 2023, you might run into me there, because I'm sold. I'm coming.
I can't wait. I can't wait, Lauren. That'll be amazing.
It's on my list too. I do, I do like to travel, and I've got my eye on possibly a trip to the States next year. So I may have to hop on by. And may I also say one of the character names you've gone for in this trilogy, I don't think I've ever come across another Jazz in a book. So I saw that and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to read these books, because like I said, I've never come across another Jazz in a book.
Yes, he's one of the main two protagonists, and I alternate first-person voices between him and a young teen girl. But I think even when I described his character to you, you went, "Oh, that's me."
Yeah, right. You did. You gave me some. I remember. Yeah.
Having that kind of scientific mind and exploring their more intuitive self, kind of a character, and so. Yeah, you hope that there are people who will read the story and find themselves in it, and you can share a good story. So,
thank you. Well, this has been great, Lyndi. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story and your writing and your retreat stuff and all of this stuff. It's been great. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. Nice meeting you, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.